Often, as a sailor, one of the biggest questions or the most commonly asked questions I get is where's the best place to sail? And I have a globe to choose from, and I always pick the remote, harsh conditions of the Southern Ocean. But when it's closer to home and we talk about the British Isles, I have to admit that I've spent a lot of time sailing past places and haven't really had the chance to explore too much, apart from the home waters of the Solent. And I know that some of the coastline looks absolutely stunning, so I've got some friends along to have a conversation to find out where we should all be going sailing closer to home, somewhere along the coastline of our British Isles. So I'm going to start with Maggie Adamson because I've seen you on the Solent. I've seen you racing around the English Channel, normally double-handed. But as somebody from Scotland, you probably have a different opinion on where the best place to sail is.
Yeah, I'm a bit lucky because I've been able to dip in and out of different disciplines in sailing. So, as you say, the racing down on the Solent is fast and furious, and you get to do a lot of that. But also, coming from Shetland, I've had the chance to cruise an awful lot around the Northern Isles and the north of Scotland. So, I think I'm going to be a bit biased and pick around there because there's not so many people make it up. A lot of people do the west coast of Scotland, and it's fantastic. We had the chance to go and sail a lot there last year. But if you can get the weather to go just that further north, then Shetland has so much to offer in different anchorages and small marinas and harbours, and it's a real great coastline.
But correct me if I'm wrong, this is about the 1 week of the year that you have to get the weather right to enjoy it. Otherwise, you're battling ferocious storms.
Well, yeah, it can be a little bit like that. Summer's on a Wednesday this year, so. um, I think the other thing with Shetland is if there's a gale blowing, there's always some sort of shelter. So if you can skip over to the east side or the west side, then there's always somewhere that you can go sailing because there's more flat water around all islands than you think and get the impression usually.
So I guess because of the conditions you're dealing with, and for me, externally looking onto the coastline, it's a harsh environment. You know, a, a, a sailor from Scotland is a pretty highly skilled individual.
Yeah, you get a chance to figure out all the different weather conditions, and usually too much wind or waves doesn't really. You just learn to work with it. So yeah, I think that's probably in our favour a little bit. And they say there's no such thing as bad weather; it's just bad clothing. So always have your rain jacket handy.
Says a true Scot for sure. Now, Roger, you've written books on cruising companions. You know, you are the gospel to what we should all have in our back pocket when we're trying to find the best place to sail. Where do you think is a good place?
Well, I now live in France, so I do a lot of sailing in France. And it's quite interesting when I'm thinking, I do a lot of just sailing at weekends. You know, I cruise in a dinghy. And so often I just go to somewhere I know is going to be sheltered and relaxing. You've had a hard week and you don't want to, you know, confront the challenges of maybe sailing around Shetland or somewhere like that. And so I used to do that in England as well. I lived in the southwest of England for many years, and I would sail in the Solent or in the rears of the West Country, places like Dartmouth, you know, the Dart, places like that. But I am going to say the Bristol Channel. The
Oh,
Bristol Channel is the
controversial,
place
Roger.
we should all go sailing. And the reason you should go sailing in the Bristol Channel is it's real. It's just extraordinary. Most of the harbour's dry. It's big tidal range, 15 metres tidal range. So second highest tidal range in the world. The tidal streams about 5 knots, and they obviously change every 6 hours. And if they're going against the wind, which they do every 6 hours, you can kick up a really nasty steep sea off the headlands. So it's challenging, it's tough, it's real. But set against that, you've got these amazing drying harbours, places like Clovelly or Lynmouth, Watchet, which are really honest and straightforward, and there's no big marinas. It's and there's the coastline is basically cliffs most of the way. The Welsh coast is a bit more, obviously the Bristol Channel is, I should say, between Wales and the southwest of England. and it goes, I suppose it extends from Lundy all the way up to the bridges that link Wales to England. But you can go under those bridges and carry on up the Severn, and that's really interesting to do because the tide belts you along, and there's a thing called the chutes. You go up sort of under, you really do shoot under those bridges, and you see the cars going over the top. And up there, there's the little port of Lydney, which is again just extraordinary little place, just a sort of a little sailing club and a slipway and a breakwater, and that's it. Again, no big marina. So there's this sense that you're discovering something new. You feel that this is real sailing. So yes, but it's tough. I have capsized on Bideford Bar a few times, which is exciting. It's one of the ways you get out onto the Bristol Channel. There are very few places to launch, but quite a good place is Appledore, which is a lovely Devon town of lots of white houses, sort of honest Devon town. And there's a very good slipway there. But you've then got to go over the bar at Bideford, which faces west. And the thing is, it faces America. There is nothing sheltering it short of New York. So the waves come rolling in the Bristol Channel and hit Bideford Bar. So if there's a big swell, you can have very big seas on the bar. So it's dodgy. It's not a place you run to, if you're seeking shelter. And the thing is, with the Bristol Channel, there isn't really anywhere to run to if you're seeking shelter for half the tide, because everywhere dries. You would want to go in over Bideford Bar at high water slack, really. So you have to actually hit it at that time. But as I say, the rewards in terms of the scenery, in terms of the sense of, yes, going somewhere new and fresh, even though these little places are well known. If you go into somewhere like Ilfracombe, it does feel like you're discovering it for the first time. Just extraordinary. There you are, Bristol Channel.
Well, I think that's a really highly technical choice. I think that's a big call, and it's made the Shetlands seem more appealing now. So I think what you've done is actually make Maggie's suggestion more appealing, because that sounds quite ferocious with the tides. The water's quite brown, I seem to remember, from the Bristol Channel, and yeah, as you say, it's a challenge. A big call, Roger.
It's brown once you get to the Severn. Further down, it's fairly blue. Off somewhere like Clovelly, it's normal coloured water. When you get these cliffs behind Clovelly and streams just blow off the top of the cliff. So there are waterfalls that, if there's a strong wind, they blow backwards up the cliff. So you approach this cliff face thinking, where's Clovelly? I'm sure it's there. And suddenly there you see it, a little group of houses clambering up a little crevice in the cliff face, and this tiny little 16th century harbour with just local fishing boats in it. No marina, horrible tidal surge, ground chains to tie your boat to. Yeah.
He gives with one hand, and he takes away with the other.
Proper sailing.
Every time you make it sound appealing, you just
but it's lovely. It's just, Clovelly is just extraordinary. And there's the Red Line Inn just immediately by the harbour, and all the houses are lived in by local fishermen, because Clovelly is an estate village, and they won't let you live there unless you actually have work in the locality. So unlike everywhere else, it's not in the West Country, it's not lots of holiday homes. It's actually, it's drop dead gorgeous and lived in by local people. Just extraordinary. And you just sail in and people come and greet you because you're the only boat that arrived that day. Yes, they're amazed you got there.
Okay, so in contrast to the challenge of the Bristol Channel and aiming to get to Clovelly if you ever get there, we're going to go inland, back to Scotland, Ayrshire. Rory, what's your opinion on what's been said, and where would your vote go to for the best place to sail in the British Isles?
Well, it all sounds very exciting, everything that's been said so far. As a dinghy sailor, I'm less experienced at the offshore stuff, more with the lochs and lakes of the country. I was giving this a lot of thought, and at first I thought, well, heck, how many places have I actually sailed inland in the UK? And actually, once I listed it off, there was quite a few. This might sound obvious, but for my favourite place to sail, it has to be Bardowie Loch, which is my own club. And I know that it sounds incredibly obvious, but I don't think there's anywhere else really that I find so helpful in terms of time spent on the water, what I get out of it, because I'm constantly thinking about training and trying to keep sharp with the tacks and so on. And Bardowie is just ridiculously shifty. Being in a wee hollow as it is, the wind usually comes from the west, southwest, comes over a hill, crashes down onto the loch, and then it's contained in this wee bowl. And you can easily, you can go from pointing south to north to west to northwest, whatever it is, and you've never tacked on your way upwind. It's a zigzag the whole way up. I was down there for a committee meeting the other night in the club, and we were looking out the windows, and it's you can always see the change of direction in the ripples in the water, zigzagging their way down the loch. And if I'm honest, I one of the places that I sail less now is at the club. I'm always away racing other places, so I actually find it a great pleasure now when I do get to go back to the club and sail where I learned in the first place. So it will always hold a special place in my heart for that reason.
I like that. I like that. And the fact that it's so shifty, has that given you skills that has actually made you stronger in other places, reading the water, reading the shifts from the topography around the water?
Yeah, I'd say so. We're affected less by thermals and that sort of thing than you would be in other places. It just seems to just bounce its way down the loch. But I do think it does keep you sharp for your tacks, definitely. And in fact, when I first went and sailed on the sea, which would be Largs or Weymouth, probably Largs would be the first place, and my problem was I didn't know where to stop because there was no shore to force you to tack. So, upwind beats in a single tack. So yeah, it's definitely a compact, contained little body of water, but there's quite a lot packed in there.
So a technical challenge just to contain it. Maggie's nodding. Have you sailed there, Maggie?
I haven't, but I've sailed in a couple of lochs down that way, and it's the same sort of thing. You've just got to keep eyes out the boat the whole time.
Yeah, I remember sailing the Three Peaks race where you head up to Fort William at the end, and literally that loch you end up going down. It gets narrower and narrower. It was like 45 tacks or something ridiculous in ridiculous wind as it funneled down, and I was like, no wonder the Scots sailors are pretty hardcore. It's good training. Now, someone else who's inshore is Elizabeth Earle. You've actually changed and your whole life is on the water and you are living on a narrowboat, is that correct?
Yes, I live on a century-old ex-working narrowboat. It used to be pulled by horses back in the day. So it's from Birmingham, 1928, proper Peaky Blinder lifestyle. But I started as a sailor. And then I adopted a street dog, and she's right here with me. She's very ungrateful. On the Ashby Canal at the moment, and the Ashby Canal is right smack bang centre of the Midlands. And so basically living on the canals, it's like you're trapped in history, and I'm a huge fan of history, and everything's unchanged. You can be here for a month and you feel like you're back in the 19th century, which is wonderful. And living on a boat here on the canal, life is very, very slow. So it's really nice hearing about everyone else's adrenaline-fueled sailing experiences, whereas my sort of disaster is if I've ran out of milk or tea bags, and that is it. And it's a very slow pace of life, but I love the Ashby Canal because it goes through Bosworth Battlefield, which is the site where I'm so nerdy, I can't even apologise for it because I think it's so cool. It is the last battle site of where Richard III fought Henry Tudor, Henry VII, and it's incredible going through, and it feels so important and spooky going through it. And I love history. I love everything about this canal. So yeah.
So I'm loving this history and living on the water, this combination. Do you think that the canal network and the inland waterways helps the creativity that you seem to have totally adopted in your lifestyle?
Oh, I mean, absolutely, because I mean, the romantic notion is to be like, oh, I'm surrounded by the countryside. It's so beautiful. Oh, look at the birds, look at the flowers blooming. But it's mostly because my boat's broken down. I've ran out of power, so what do I have to do to occupy myself? And that's like do some painting, do some reading, or do some writing. I'm literally living like a sick Victorian child. So, but yes, it helps with creativity. Yes, it's very nice.
And has it increased in popularity in recent years? I'm going to ask you these questions while we've got you
Yeah.
online, just because I have experienced a narrowboat for 3 days, and it was like a whole new world opened up to me. And I was like, I could do this holiday with my dog. It would be amazing. But you don't get very far very fast, do you?
No, no, no. We actually a couple of years ago there was a police chase.
Police chase.
Just
Okay.
Somebody stole a boat.
Oh, yes.
Continue.
I'm talking about the slow pace of life. A couple of years ago, this drunk old man broke into this person's narrowboat, drank all his liquor, decided to take it for to steal it, and the police had to follow him for like 6 to 8 hours. Because and he was it's just walking alongside for 6 hours on the canal, so it is a very slow pace of life. You're not going to get anywhere fast at all. But in terms of popularity, I have seen it kind of explode. So basically, in the 1960s, the work in boat trade started to die down. The reason why the narrowboats started in the first place to transport goods was because horses and carts were no good for that. Narrowboats with the working class started to move all the haulage, and then of course you had the railways that kind of, brought it down, and then lorries. So the boating industry was brought back to life because the railways were buying the canals and filling them in to get rid of that competition. The 1960s, we had a huge resurgence of boating as a holiday aspect. So what we're seeing now is that it's been a lot more gentrified. Whereas originally it was built by the working class, and the working class lived on there and to be quite looked down on as they're working. And now it's become quite refined, darling. You get quite a few people who've retired, they've got their shiny boats, everything's all brassed up, and you can tell because they have those cream jumpers which they tie around their necks and look all quite dandy. So, but I'm glad you're enjoying your holidays. It is a great time, especially when you get to share it with other people and share the manual labour. But for me personally, I'm just knackered right now doing it solo.
Well, I think one of the other skills you need on a narrowboat is really good flower arranging, because when you walk down the inland waterways, there's always beautiful flowers on top of the narrowboats.
Oh yeah, that's the top skill that I require if anyone comes on board. I'm like, are you good at flower? Yeah, no, it's so beautiful. I do that when I see my mum with all the flowers and the blooms that come up. I always pick a little posy of flowers, and I get proper daughter points for that. So it is really stunning. It's just like those, the old biscuit tins your nan used to keep to put all her sewing stuff inside. It's just like that sort of picture box. You're spot on.
Oh, lovely. Well, somebody that writes all about where we need to go when we're cruising around is the Shell Channel pilot. And I remember reading this book when I first started cruising, just so I knew where we were going and what to expect. Now, Rachel Sprott, you write this book, so you know all about everywhere in the UK, especially the English Channel. But where is your best place to sail, in your opinion?
Oh, this is a really difficult one, and I think it's also a little bit against the philosophy of a pilot book compiler to have a favourite port, because I think you're really supposed to just kind of like them all, which I do. But
we won't tell anyone, it's a secret. Just tell us.
Well, I think my allegiance is to my home port of Plymouth, which is just a huge natural harbour with so many different nooks and crannies that, yeah, it's got the most amazing variety, really. And it doesn't quite have the rugged appeal of Shetland or the Bristol Channel, but you can definitely go from being in the heart of a really sort of big bustling city having fish and chips on the quayside to a remote anchorage with the wading birds and absolutely no one else around within about 5 miles. And you don't even have to go to sea, which is absolutely ideal sometimes, especially if you've got new sailors on board, or people that perhaps are a bit time short and you just want to get out for a couple of hours in the evening or something. So yeah, I moved here a couple of years ago, mainly because I really loved the harbour and fell in love with it as a cruising ground, and I still haven't really managed to explore all of its different branches and arms, although I'm sort of ticking one off a year with extra kind of adventures up the various different rivers. I suppose Oh, sorry, go for it.
No, that's one of the deceiving things with Plymouth Harbour, is how much more there is behind the scenes compared to just that visual that everyone has of the harbour there.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the amazing approach in through the breakwater, which I think as a sort of ocean sailor, you can just be very grateful to be able to make a landfall somewhere like Plymouth, where you can just sail in under full sail. You don't have to worry about dropping any sails outside in the weather. You can get tucked in behind Corsand Bay, and there's plenty of shelter for dealing with your sails. So I think that always is a welcome at the end of a long passage that's nice to have. But then you've also, like you say, got so many different aspects to it. You've got a military port with submarines kind of tied up alongside the dock. You've got the cross-channel ferries, a bit of commercial activity going up on the Plym side, at least 4 marinas, and then all the different branches, the River Liner and the Tamar, which you can go and explore at the weekend and get off piste and go and have the place to yourself. So it's really versatile, and it manages to pack quite a lot into quite a small area, I guess.
I remember being quite new to sailing, to big boat sailing, and I was doing my competent crew and day skipper, and I actually did that course based out of the River Yelm. So I know that area very well. As a beginner, it's, as you say, got lots of shelter, but your access to open water is really quick. So I think it's a great place for beginners and more technical sailors.
Yeah, that's true. And the Yelm, just outside Plymouth Sound is a great sort of evening trip on a Friday night. It's a couple of hours sail away from Plymouth, and it's got really kind of picturesque little villages with amazing pubs on the waterfront. So that's a really popular weekend anchorage. And the other thing it's got is some really amazing old-fashioned boatyards tucked away in quarries in the upper reaches of some of these rivers. So I've been keeping my boat in an old quarry at a place called Treluggan. And the only chart that I've found that's any good for getting there is the OS maps. And it really shows the deep water contours much better than Navionics or the Admiralty have given up charting it, I think. So it's quite a good place to have an adventure as well, even on a sort of micro scale, just going 3 miles up an uncharted river.
Maybe we need to commission you to write a pilot book for the micro adventures as well.
That would be fun. Yeah, I think unfortunately, the scope of the channel pilot means that some of these little bits probably won't make it in there, just for, brevity. But yeah.
Rory, you mentioned sailing on the Loch in Scotland where you learnt, and then going coastal to Largs and to Weymouth. That difference between inland and coastal, how much of a shock to the system was it? Or, was it all in your stride?
Well, we're talking a long time ago now, a good few years ago. But yeah, I think the main shock, as I said, was just the amount of space available and the lack of physical barriers forcing you to tack. And it did take me quite a long time to stop going from the start line to the windward mark in one tack. Sometimes it paid off spectacularly. More often than not, it failed spectacularly. But yeah, just over the years, having sailed more and more on the sea, you get used to that and you learn what to do. Definitely my class of boat, the Hansas, they sail them on the sea more on the continent in Europe than what we do here in the UK. Most of our regattas are limited to inland bodies of water. We do a lot of gravel pit sailing on the traveller circuit down south, which makes it very tricky. And again, going back to my club, being on your tacks, sharpen your tacks is definitely helpful.
Definitely. And Maggie, you've sailed the length and breadth of the country. What's your probably most technical and challenging place to sail?
So that's a really tricky question because so much of that is based on the weather. So you can say like Shetland, you can get some really coarse waves. I remember that last round Britain and Ireland race, the leg from St Kilda up to Shetland was pretty tough and upwind, and you had the Atlantic swell coming in with the North Sea kind of short waves. I think the Solent is going to be up there for racing because of the tides, and if you can learn to work the tides going around there, then that makes such a difference. You can really nail something, or you can get stuck and fall behind the rest of the fleet quite quickly. So yeah, I'm not sure about the trickiest place. It's a yeah.
Roger, you set out with a tricky place to sail right from the get-go, but where else have you kind of gone, oh, this is so technical that, it's not for the lesser mere mortals?
Ooh, well, it's normally tidal places, and the Bristol Channel is certainly tidal. But the thing about the Bristol Channel is it's big and wide. Once you get out there, there are no really complicated off-lying shoals. And that makes sailing very technical, and I have to agree with my fellow panelists about the west coast of Scotland. The thing is there that you have such a complicated topography, because the whole thing about the west coast of Scotland's thing is that mountains come down into the sea, so you've got this very high ground, you've got interesting winds, but then it peppers off into lots of islands and sounds between the islands. And unlike the Bristol Channel, the tidal range is, I would say, not very great, sort of 3 or 4 meters, but that creates huge tidal streams because sea locks have to fill with water and then empty through narrow entrances. And there are all sorts of interesting places like the Doris Moor and Cuan Sound and so on, where the tide rushes through. The Gulf of Corryvreckan, yeah, there's a good one. And those are really very technical, and the pleasure you get from navigating them, from using the tides, hitting the tide at just the right moment is and in this beautiful scenery, that's really special. I think that's the west coast of Scotland. It's not the distilleries and things like that. It's the intricacy of the navigation using the tides.
Well, you've all actually mentioned, I don't know whether it's subliminally, but actually you've all mentioned the stunning scenery, like what's around you. When we're sailing, we talk about sailing and people assume we're all consumed in the action at the time. And quite often when you're racing, you are. But when you get to cruise or sail for enjoyment and you get to look out, the difference is in the scenery. And I think, Rachel, obviously you're biased to Plymouth, but what's kind of like been a standout place where you've gone, God, this is absolutely stunning. I didn't even know it existed.
Oh, that's a really good question. I love the Jurassic coast between Weymouth and Poole. I kind of can never quite get tired of that. It's just so dramatic and interesting, and sailing along there past Lulworth Cove and Warbarrow Bay. I think they were probably my first taste of, oh wow, this is a bit different to the view you might get, from the marina, and I think that probably gave me my first taste of sailing as an adventure. But I think probably there are some places on the northeast as well, which I was thinking about, tricky places that we were talking about earlier, and I've been working up in the northeast and Farne Islands and that kind of Northumbrian coast with these amazing wild windswept beaches, which they're all quite inhospitable for sailors, but they're quite kind of wild and romantic, and there's something to that, even if it's not the easiest cruising ground.
Well, I think it's interesting. One thing that's common for all of you, and we've covered quite a length and breadth of the country there, of actually to sail in the British Isles is quite technical. You've got to be willing to kind of face nature and some hazards along the way. And we've heard some pretty big adventures, but as a community, as a boating community, to encourage people to cruise on their home grounds, not always fly for their holiday, how can we help this grow? How can we help our community grow and encourage others to cruise? Roger, what are your thoughts on that?
I often think about this because I think the British coastline is just extraordinary, and if only people knew what riches there are around the British coastline, they probably wouldn't go anywhere else. Though I have to say the French coastline where I live now is quite nice as well, which the Shell Channel pilot presumably covers both sides of the English Channel. So yes, much of the coast of northwestern Europe, let's not be too nationalistic about it. These are really interesting places, and I don't think you could ever get bored with it. And it is the way that you really can get away from the crowds, particularly in a small shoal draft boat. But say I cruise in a dinghy, though I have done quite a lot of cruising in yachts. I used to charter yachts off the west coast of Scotland, so much of my sailing in Scotland was in sort of 32-foot yachts and going out to St Kilda and places like that. But the thing about the west coast of Scotland is you can get away from other boats there. As you get sort of further west, the number of marinas gets fewer and fewer, and you're just mooring in rocky anchorages and choosing them, depending on the weather and the swell and so on. And that's the fascination of Scotland. But in more crowded areas, it's extraordinary how a small boat can go up a river, like somewhere like Salcombe. If you go to the Kingsway River, if you go beyond Salcombe and carry on going, you're in the middle of the Devon countryside, and there'd be no one around because everyone is fearful of drying out in this really shallow creek, muddy creek. What stops people doing it is, I think, that it is actually very challenging. You do have to have developed quite a skill to be able to do it. And you can't just stop. Unlike climbing mountains, a lot of people, it's very like going up a mountain. What I do, I cruise in a dinghy and I set up a tent over the dinghy. So it's a bit like going up the top of Scuttle Pike or Great Gable in the Lake District and putting up a little lightweight tent. And lots of people do that because you can actually just stop. If you get too tired, you can just stop. Okay, you've got to get down the mountain at some point, but you can stop and have a rest. And the thing about sailing is that sometimes you cannot just stop. You can't just stop and get off. You have to actually get your boat into some sort of safety and some sort of shelter. And that can be, very challenging. And I think that's what prevents more people doing it.
It's a different thing as well. It's the physicality, but also the mental escape that we get from being outdoors with nature, harnessing its power. I mean, Rory, what do you think the importance is for people that get to cruise or go sailing? What do they get? What do you get from it outside of competition?
Well, I suppose maybe an overused term, but just the sense of freedom, isn't it? Once you're on the water, you can go any which way you like, in theory. Obviously, if we're on a lake or a loch, we're a bit more limited on that front. But yeah, as soon as you hit the sea, in theory, you can go anywhere. And I can imagine that is the main feeling that inspires so many sailors to take to the water in the first place.
And I think with, the sense of swallows and Amazons and going exploring, Rachel, how do we get that back to, children today? How do we kind of get them back to that sense of adventure and want to try, camping on their dinghy somewhere on an island in the middle of a lake?
I think that's a really good question. I think probably harnessing the kind of big natural harbours that we've got, which are kind of inland cruising grounds like Chichester Harbour, Portsmouth, Plymouth. There's lots of east coast rivers and parts of the west coast and the west coast of Scotland, because you can sort of have those mini adventures but still be quite close to base and still be quite close to someone being able to drive a car along and pick you up off the side if you have accidentally ended up somewhere you're not supposed to be. So I think I'm with Roger on the advocating for the small boat stuff and going shallower, not further, and kind of getting away from the crowds by going, yeah, going on smaller boats to places other people can't reach. It's just as effective and a lot easier than going off ocean sailing.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a sense of the smaller the boat, the closer to the coastline we can get, and the more we can see these magic places you're talking about. Maggie, you're sailing boats of all different sizes, from like taking people sailing, chartering to racing. Um, how important is it for us to educate people on our blue spaces and what's available to them?
Yeah, I think it's so important, and we're really lucky in sailing in that it can cover so many different disciplines, and we've got something for everyone, from going from a small day sail to a multi-day um, trip. And I think encouraging younger people, especially in this day and age where there's so much technology and your phones are in your pockets all the time, and you go on a trip and you don't have signal, and suddenly what's important is not the world or keeping up your streaks on Snapchat or whatever it is. It's the people that's on the boat, and that's the most important thing, is keeping that small community running, and the boat becomes important, not everything around you. And I think that's a really important thing for people to experience and to find out what then becomes the priorities. So educating people on that and using the space around you and whatever boat that might be is a great experience.
That connection. And while we've got Elizabeth, I'm just checking that you got a
Sorry.
good connection there, Elizabeth. No, that's good. I'm just thinking of, that's a big step to leave your house and live on a boat on the waterways. But, what would be your encouragement for people to maybe just try it as a holiday, or, make that big giant step?
I feel like people, there's a lot of fear around stepping out into the unknown. Like, we're brought up with the expectation of, you go to school, you go to college, uni, you get a job, and then, when you retire, that's when you can do the stuff that you want to do. And that just seems like a very sad storyline to me. And I feel like it's now become the norm to stick to that, and some people are so scared of breaking out of that box because of either family. So there's always a reason to not do it. But when I first started sailing, it was the scariest decision I ever made, and it ultimately changed my life. And I think for people, the way that I would encourage them to do it is that if they want to learn, get a deeper relationship with themselves and learn what they are actually capable of, and that you do a lot of growth through difficult times. I'm sure everyone here, you've had many gnarly sailing instances, and once you're in the middle of it, you're thinking, oh my god, just kill me, this is horrible, I'm soaking wet, I've hurt my hand, I'm cold, I don't want to do this anymore, I want a cup of tea and some crumpets. But then afterwards you're like, oh my god, it was amazing. Yeah, and you build that trust in yourself to know that, oh, next time a storm comes, I can handle it. And I think that goes side and side with like emotional challenges, day-to-day challenges. So I feel like getting really in touch with the human spirit, I would definitely encourage anyone to live out their main character energy and just do it, because you might get hit by a bus next week, and you might as well just risk it for a biscuit.
Wise word. Don't cross the road and eat lots of biscuits.
Yes.
Our inland waterways are probably less well known. Is it something that you hope we can share more? Because, there's a wealth of space out there that could be explored that I feel that many citizens don't know about.
So we used to have a lot more waterways than what we do. I want to say we have about 4,000 miles worth of waterways, which is a lot. Like Birmingham is like the Venice the very working class Venice of Britain. But when the railways took over in the 1960s, a lot of the old canals were filled in. So now what we would like the Canal and River Trust to do is to reopen these old canalways so there's more room. At the moment, there is this sort of ideology that the canals are becoming overcrowded in some places. I live in the Midlands, like it's fine for me. I'm not in London, but I feel like a lot more funding needs to go into the canal so we can host more people.
Rachel, there's a lot of marinas, there's a lot of boats on the water, but many of these boats never move. How do we encourage the boat owners to have the confidence to go out and explore?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think probably making the story fun without and sort of informative without being intimidating. And yeah, I think that we need to get a bit better at telling the stories about the micro adventures. And I think the big adventures often attract the attention, but actually the evening that you spent in an amazing anchorage with a full moon and no one else around, they're often the ones that really stick with you as much as the big adventures, and they're kind of unexpected and they just happen. And I think probably just telling the story of those little trips that actually really are kind of what make it all worthwhile. And it doesn't have to be a 4-week epic. It can be a couple of hours at the weekend and you can be back in your berth on Sunday morning and getting ready for work. And I think that would be a good thing to get out there a bit more.
Yeah, you'd probably agree with that, wouldn't you, Roger?
Well, I would. I actually, this is not a book plug, but I have a book out in November, and it's called Sailing the Shallows. And the whole aim was to talk about ordinary sailing in shallow waters. And you're under huge pressure writing such a book to write about the exciting adventures where you nearly capsized and drowned. And there are a few of them because there have to be. But I tried very hard to write about ordinary passages to ordinary places that are very unchallenging, and yes, sailing into history, because inland waterways are like that. There is actually quite a lot of inland waterways in the book. I have a canal passage from I went to Oxford when I did a postgrad course in Oxford, and I sailed from where I was living in Preston, bought an old boat and sailed it down through the canals and arrived in Oxford, because the canals are, you can do that, you can go right across the country. And it's fascinating, as Elizabeth says, just that each canal was built at a different stage, so the locks are all different. You know, sorry, these are not locks as in Scotland, these are locks that alter the level of the canal. And there's all sorts of technology like swing aqueducts across the Manchester Ship Canal and stuff like that. Just extraordinary technology at the cutting edge of 19th century transport. And but it was really advanced, but also nothing happened more than the speed of a horse, because narrowboats were pulled along by horses. And even though they motorised narrowboats a bit later, and the narrowboats are now motorised, they still only move along at the speed of horses. So there's this extraordinary way in which you're travelling across Britain at the speed of horse-drawn transport. And it is just such an insight into a lost world. So that's I think it's that trying to see the specialness in the everyday. And I think that more people should be thinking about sailing in that way, and also avoiding I think the big problem with sailing is, particularly yachting, it's become something prestigious. And I think the reason lots of people keep big yachts in marinas is they buy the yacht because it's prestigious, and then sailing it is actually too stressful, so they just hold parties for their friends in the marina and stay hooked up to the electricity. Because taking a boat out to sea, everything starts getting damaged and wet and get thrown around, doesn't it? Lots of people don't like that. So it's we should remember that it is an outdoor activity, and it is about getting out into the natural world. That's what it's about. It's not about having a big yacht with lots of ensuite bathrooms and hot and cold running water necessarily, which is why I believe we should all sail dinghies. There we are. I'm going to stick with that as a as the policy solution. And then
I like that.
Then you tend to sail in smaller waters, and it's much more interesting. Things happen. Nowadays, I'm having this problem of short attention spans. I think it's probably driven by the internet. And if I go out, take my boat out to sea, after about 2 hours, I'm thinking something should be happening now. There's waves, and there's 2 hours worth of waves, and I think, can't we arrive at an island or go up a river or something like that? I'm fed sick and tired of this sort of crossing this sheet of water. So.
Well,
that's a
your time
lovely
to
thing
tack.
you can do.
According to Rory, that's your time to tack. When you get bored, you just tack then out at sea.
Well, yes, but maybe you're running with the wind and you're crossing the English Channel or something, or sailing out to St Kilda. You've got to sort of keep going for hours and hours and hours, haven't you? And that's challenging and interesting. But actually sailing up somewhere like sailing up the Tamar that Rachel was talking about. And up the St Germains River. Is that how you pronounce it? Rather than St Germain? I think St Germains River. And you can go I've been all the way up there, and eventually you end up poling your boat along up a sort of little narrow creek surrounded by rushes. It's just extraordinary, deep into the Devon countryside.
Rory, just to finish off for you, how easy is it for a beginner to go sailing on a Scottish loch? I mean, you're talking about your home club, where you learnt to sail, but it can be quite intimidating, I can imagine. You're talking how technical it was. Is it beginner friendly? Is it user friendly?
Okay, definitely. I mean, I know I said about the sort of the technicalities of it, but the reality is that it is a relatively sheltered small body of water. There's very little can go wrong, and that would be the case with a lot of sailing clubs in Scotland. I always think the greatest barrier is, of course, we're limited to where the water is, and that isn't always in an urban area. We're limited to where the lochs are. More of the coastal stuff, you'll be in a town and so on. But yeah, getting to the water in the first place would be the greatest barrier to a lot of people. But once you're there, it's no bother. There's always a way to get on the water somehow. And of course, we all know it's a very safe sport when you're learning.
There's always somebody to come and rescue you.
Exactly. So something could go wrong, but there's always someone there to help.
Well, if I'm going, I'm going to make sure you're around, Rory. Maggie, have we got you back again?
I'm not sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. So tell me, is it possible as a racing sailor now to switch off and enjoy your cruising, or are you all about performance?
No, you can switch off and enjoy it, but I probably do still go around and trim the sails a bit more often than you would. But it's different when you've just everybody's got their dinner or a cup of tea and you start heeling over, then you find yourself easing out the main sheet, which feels so wrong. So try and stop you heeling a bit too much. But I think
you've got a nice balance.
I think so, yeah. And also if you can use performance and you can get places that a little bit quicker and enjoy them when you're anchoring up. But I think one thing that I really enjoy about the cruising is seeing the land from the perspective of the sea. I'm not sure if that's been mentioned yet or not, but it's so different to taking a car and driving around a lot of these places. If you're actually on the water looking back at it, it's a really special thing to be able to do. And I think especially sitting in an anchorage somewhere that there's not another house and you get the whole scenery all the way around you is really cool. So I enjoy that side of it as well.
Well, I just want to thank you all for your time. I'm inspired to sail on my home waters a little more, and you've definitely given us a perspective, the length and breadth of the country, along the coastline and inland. So thank you very much.